Hello, my name is Emma Cieslik. Today's date is Thursday, March 28th, 2019. I'm interviewing Dr. Barb Stedman on the Ball State campus as part of the Ball State University Honors College Oral History Project. Thank you, Dr. Stedman, for agreeing to participate in this effort which we're conducting during the Honors College's 60th anniversary year. I'd like to begin by asking you where and when you were born.
I was born in Canton, Ohio in 1959, March 22nd, 1959.
And how would you describe your early life in Canton?
Well, I actually grew up closer to Massillon, so I grew up in between two cities, small cities that are very close to each other. So my family had a home that was set back in the woods, away from the road. So we had literally one neighbor. We had 6 acres. We were surrounded by many hundreds of acres of woods. So my childhood was spent mostly playing in the woods, which is what I still do today. So that was essentially my childhood. I had 2 older brothers, and since they were significantly older, I in some ways had the benefits of being almost like an only child and getting to spend my days reading, playing, climbing trees, that sort of thing.
And what were your brothers' names?
Lynn, his full name is Lindsay, and then Dave was the older brother, David. So.
And what were your parents' names?
Alan and Thelma Stedman.
Yes. And do you have any very influential figures in your early life, possibly a family member or a friend?
Well, my family was very active in the church that we attended, so I had close friends from there. I think one person who stands out was my 6th grade teacher, Mr. Delmer Stranger. And of course, we were all horribly brutal and behind his back making fun of his name. But years later, I realized what an incredibly creative teacher he was. And so he was one of those people that, even at the time that I didn't realize it, he was helping us, and I think especially students like me, really stretch our minds, explore other cultures, explore other ways of doing things, adding creative components to regular old classroom activities.
Yes. And expanding on that, how would you describe your elementary and middle school education?
Nothing particularly noteworthy. You said elementary and high school, or just elementary?
Elementary and middle and high school. Yes.
We didn't have middle schools back in those days. Of course, we had junior highs. So I attended 2 different elementary schools just because districts were changed at one point. So, pretty typical middle America kind of school experience. I don't remember much of junior high at all, except all of the usual painful memories that most junior high kids have. We're all awkward and dealing with acne and weight and all of those kinds of things.
Yes. And how would you describe your time at Jackson High School?
Oh, amazing. My years in high school were absolutely amazing. So first year of high school, 9th grade, I got involved with an absolutely wonderful group of female friends, and we were very tight, just good people. We were the good girls of my graduating class. But I was very active in sports, so I was a 4-sport athlete. And I honestly, at this point, I can't even remember what other activities I was involved with. I think I was on the school newspaper, but I'm not sure, so I'll leave that open, but mostly sports.
Did you have any personal mentors?
My coaches were very fine people. A couple of them I stayed in touch with quite a few years after high school. As I said before, I was very active in church, so my youth group director and his wife were very influential people. But honestly, isn't that terrible? I can't think really of other mentors. I was fairly independent and very connected to my group of friends.
What was the youth director's name?
Tom. And that's as far as I can remember.
And how would you describe your extracurricular involvement impacting your early college career?
Well, I did try out for volleyball in college and was promptly cut from the team. I just wasn't that caliber of an athlete. I was very active in lots of perhaps not formal activities in high school. And again, I know I was involved in a lot. I just can't remember. I was involved in Spanish Club, National Honor Society, a club that's called Y Teens. It's essentially a YMCA kind of group for high school kids. So lots and lots of clubs like that. I was a leader of at least a couple of them. I just don't remember, but I was very much like my father. I still am very much like my father, always very curious, always had to be very, very busy. So I was always doing something in my spare time. I never sat around and watched TV.
Yes. And how would you describe your early time in college education? Were you involved in any extracurriculars at Taylor University?
Because it's a small liberal arts college, I graduated with about, well, there are 1,500 students and in the entire college, and I think my graduating class was right around 350. So actually it was even a little bit smaller than my high school. So there weren't a lot of extracurricular activities, but I was involved with the yearbook. I was assistant editor one year. I was involved again in sports, primarily through intramurals, and that's probably about the extent of it.
Yes. I know it says that you had graduated in 1980. Which year did you matriculate?
1977. Yes. So I graduated in 3 years.
Yes. Why did you decide to go to college?
I think it was expected. Both of my brothers had gone to college. My father, interestingly, graduated from college in 1929. Graduated from high school in 1929. And he came from a long line of college-educated people, not his parents, but some of his grandparents, and then some of his aunts and uncles were actually figures very well known at Marietta College in Ohio. So my father desperately wanted to go to college and study journalism. So here we are in northeastern Ohio. He had been admitted to Ohio State University. Again, this is the fall of 1929. So he was at Ohio State down in Columbus for about 2 weeks, and his father called and said, "The market has just crashed, come home." So my father's plans for college were completely thwarted. He came back home. He went to a little local business college. He got a business degree there, just a 2-year business degree, and started a business and became an extremely successful businessman on a very small scale. So for my father, the dream and expectation was that all 3 of us, my brothers and I, would be going to college. And again, I did very well in high school. I was salutatorian, so again, there was absolutely no question I would be going to college.
Yes. In college, which majors did you pursue?
Well, for the first half of college, for the first year and a half, I was a biology pre-med major. And then there was an extraordinarily unfortunate semester of chemistry, calculus, and computer programming, and I decided I needed to become an English major. But seriously, when I started college, I knew I was either going to major in English and keep biology as my hobby, or I would be a biology major and eventually a doctor and keep English as my hobby. So I thought it's a lot easier to start off pre-med. You can't really switch to pre-med halfway very easily. So I went that route, and then after, as I say, this unfortunate semester, I switched over to English, and I'd already been taking quite a few English classes, but I still kept taking biology classes on the side.
Yes. In your college career, you were involved in a newspaper called Lifestyles?
That was not a newspaper, that was an organization.
Yes.
So there were several friends from my class and the year ahead of me, probably just about half a dozen of us, who were very concerned about the lifestyle choices we make, about consumerism, about pacifism. That was also a consideration. And there was really no organization like that at Taylor. So we said, well, let's just kind of start getting together and chatting. And we never became a formal organization, but we met once a week for about a year and a half, and we would bring speakers to campus as well. So yeah, it was part of a trend that for me at least, had started with an ecology class that I took during my sophomore year. So interestingly, at Taylor University, little old Taylor, every student was required to take an ecology course, which for me was an absolutely life-changing experience. And it wasn't just about ecology, it was about sustainability, even though of course in the late 70s no one was using that term. But it was about renewable energy and the way that we treat the planet. And so after that class, I made a personal vow to myself that for a full year I would not buy a single item of clothing, because before that I was very much a happy consumer and would head out to the shopping mall with my mother's credit card most weekends. So that class really put me on a different track ethically, and then the lifestyles group kind of grew out of that for me.
Yes. Who taught that ecology course?
Ed Squires. He hasn't been out of Taylor actually all that long. He probably retired about 10 years ago, but he was a young environmental science, I was trying to remember if he's biology, but no, he was an environmental science professor. He was only probably 4 years out of grad school himself, and he was biology too, because he was my botany professor as well. But very passionate about renewable energy and eliminating fossil fuel use from our day-to-day lives.
Expanding on that topic, you were involved in your graduate school education with the Robert Cooper Audubon Society?
That's where it started, yes.
Yes. Mm-hmm. How did that impact your growth in environmentalism and activism?
Well, in college, I took ornithology in college, and so that formalized my interest in birds. So the National Audubon Society is primarily associated with birding. So I was still a serious birder. I started in college with ornithology, continued doing lots and lots of birding. When I was here at Ball State for my master's degree in the early 80s, I heard that there was an Audubon chapter. I started going out on field trips with them, and wasn't really formally involved with them to any significant degree because grad school had consumed my life at that point. But when I eventually came back to Muncie, then I became very heavily involved with Audubon. I've been president several times and held other roles, and to this day I'm still their webmaster and do lots of birding with this group.
Yes, and at Taylor University you were involved in Wandering Wheels.
Mm-hmm.
How did that impact your college education?
It was really not a whole lot of activity during college. I did do a trip to Israel that Wandering Wheels took. Now, we weren't on bicycles then, so that was a hiking trip. But very shortly after college then, I started volunteering with them. I started doing lots of biking with them. I think they still have something they call today their mobile ministries. It's their possum ministry. So they have very large passenger buses that they've converted into seating and sleeping areas. So I frequently would serve as a female chaperone when they were taking groups of high school kids, even older groups as well. Actually, one of my neighbors, I found out, where I live now, was on one of the trips for which I was just one of the female staff members. So it was all volunteer, but it helped me get to see a lot of the country. That was a really wonderful benefit. Couple trips to the Rockies with them, trip to Nova Scotia, and then I did bicycle with them quite a bit as well. I've done 2 coast-to-coast bicycle trips with them from the West Coast to the East Coast. I've done Florida trips up the east. I think we did the East Coast of Florida. I did another trip out on the West Coast of California. So probably the biggest impact was that I ended up with much stronger thighs because of all this. So.
Would you please explain what Wandering Wheels is?
Yes, Wandering Wheels is an organization that was founded by an amazing man named Bob Davenport back in the 1960s, right? I think it was 64. And so Bob was a UCLA football star. He played pro football for a while up in Canada. And when he became a Christian, he was converted by Campus Crusade out in Southern California, and so he started on the side trying to find ways to get kids, teenagers specifically, interested in Christianity. And he knew that most kids that he was involved with had no interest in going to church. So he wanted to have some sort of very physical way of getting teenagers to engage with their faith. So he came up with this idea: let's get a bunch of bicycles and let's put them on a trip clear across the country. And I think the first, if I'm remembering correctly, the first trip was all boys. And they had these ridiculously heavy Schwinn bikes that got donated. And so he can tell you stories that probably would curl any parent's hair, but they had all sorts of misadventures and adventures. And it was enormously successful. And so very shortly after that, then in Upland, Indiana, where Taylor University is, he started this organization. Again, the Wandering Wheels are primarily bicycle wheels, but then later, sometime, I'm going to say probably in the 70s, they started their bus ministry as well.
Yes. You were involved as an assistant editor of publications. I was wondering how that impacted your career development, your growth, your interests.
I was very fortunate. Right after I graduated from Taylor, I went straight into the position as assistant editor. So while I was in college, I started doing writing for them. I became a student. In fact, I think I was the only student staff member. And it happened because of the trip that I had taken to Israel for study abroad, and I was asked if I would write an article about it. And it ended up being the cover story for the Alumni magazine. So I was very excited about that. And I continued to write occasional articles for them. So it was just kind of an easy transition. The editor did not have an assistant editor before that point, and he needed help. So he brought me in. And I only actually stayed in that position for a year. And I can't remember exactly. Again, you're asking me to remember lots of things that have started to seep out of my brain. But my recollection is that I wanted to head to grad school after that, so I didn't want to get bogged down with a job for too long. But I did continue doing staff work for them for quite some time, just on the side. So I probably altogether worked for publications at Taylor for probably about 8 years.
How did that transition into your work as you're a master's student, especially in English at Ball State?
Well, as the assistant editor, I of course had to do lots and lots of writing. I became a better editor at that point, and I think those skills and those interests did transition into English. But I had been doing a lot of journalism. I studied journalism in college as well as English. So while I was in grad school for my master's, I was also doing some other part-time jobs in editing. I knew I enjoyed that a lot. I still enjoy editing. And so the worlds of literature and journalism, I don't know if they necessarily fused, but they certainly were working alongside each other very effectively.
What were some of those part-time jobs?
Oh gosh. Well, some of it was just freelance writing. I would just send out articles. I was always looking for publications where I could get things published. Nothing significant at all. I wrote the Wandering Wheels book during that time too. So I started working on that. I was working for about a year and a half at a little organization called World Gospel Mission, which is up near Marion. Just worked as assistant editor there part-time as well. So just any odd jobs like that I could get, I would usually grab onto.
Were you involved in any campus ministry during your undergraduate education?
Well, because it was a Christian school, there were Bible studies. I was certainly part of Bible studies in my dormitory. I don't think any of the other formal ministries, though, that were offered by Taylor, and again, there weren't a whole lot. I probably am wrong about this, but my recollection is that there weren't a lot, just because everything that we were doing was supposed to be ministry.
Why did you choose to go to Taylor University?
Because of my family background, it was kind of expected that my brothers and I would all choose Christian schools. And I was originally supposed to go to a conservative Baptist school in Ohio, and I realized about a month before graduating from high school that this would not be a good place for me at all. So I started expanding the range of my search, and when I stepped on Taylor's campus, I felt like it was a good place for me. Theologically, not as conservative as some of the places I had been looking at. And then once I met the faculty in both, I think I interviewed with both faculty in biology and English, and I was so pleased with the kind of education I thought I would get there. And I did. I received an absolutely amazing education in English. Two of my professors were both Renaissance scholars. Absolutely brilliant people.
Yes. Looking forward to your graduate education here at Ball State. Why did you choose Ball State?
I didn't originally. So for my master's degree, I was actually supposed to go to Ohio State University. I had already lined up housing in a big old house with some other people in Columbus. I had enrolled in the program. But in the meantime, I got involved with a ministry in Upland, and I felt very connected to the group of people there. And in the end, probably about a week before I was supposed to move to Columbus, I thought, I'm going to stay here, because this group had really just started, and I felt like these were a group of people I wanted to stay involved with. And some of them today are still very close friends. So that was how I ended up at Ball State. Again, had absolutely no intention of coming here. So ended up doing my master's, and then years later, when I did my PhD, I had no intention of coming to Ball State. I was supposed to go to IU. And a friend who had gone to Taylor, I ran into her at a wedding. I know, and this is jumping ahead in years, but this was in 1988. I had just returned from Pakistan, and I ran into her at a wedding. And she had just transferred from IU's English program to Ball State's, and she said, if you aren't willing to give heart, soul, mind, and body to the Victorian literature program there, which is what I was planning to, I had been accepted to and was going to enroll in, she said, don't do it. She said, you will have absolutely no life. And that's what made me look at Ball State again. So somehow I came back here.
You definitely were involved in a multitude of extracurricular activities as well. While you were pursuing your master's, how were you involved in Habitat for Humanity?
Just occasional weekend builds here in town. It certainly wasn't every week by any means, maybe once a month. So probably altogether I was there maybe 10, 11 times.
How were you involved with your commitment to service with Town and Gown? I know that's a big topic here with the Ball State University and beyond. How did you see that when you were pursuing your master's?
I don't know if I was very aware of that division, quite honestly. Like a lot of graduate students, I was focused on my coursework. I was determined to get through my master's degree in 1 year, so it actually went just a little bit over that. I ended up in the hospital with surgery, so I had to drop out for 1 quarter, but came back the following quarter. So I was very focused on getting my master's degree done as quickly as possible so I could get on to the next stage. So I don't know if I really thought about it that much, but again, that's when I started getting involved with the Audubon Society. So I was making sure that I was doing other things. I don't want to call it Bible study, but it was more of a faith-based group that I was involved with in Upland was still a social core for me. So I did drive back to Upland an awful lot at that point.
Who were some of the members in the Upland group?
Well, a woman who, again, today is still one of my very good friends. So before she got married, her name was Deb Gates, and today she's Deb Varland. She married someone else that we went to Taylor with. The couple who led the group, it was a couple named Ben and Marty Mosier, and I haven't kept in touch with them at all. They moved to the UK at one point, and then when they came back to the US after several years, they moved to Texas, and I haven't had much contact with them then. But there were some other friends. Dan Utzi, I haven't seen him for a few years, but he's a social work counselor up in the northwest suburbs of Chicago.
During your time at Ball State for your master's, did you have any mentors?
I think I was moving so fast at that point. I did not have an assistantship intentionally because, again, I wanted to get through everything as quickly as possible. So I really don't think I can say that there were any mentors at that point. There were certainly faculty whom I respected and enjoyed very much, but not really any mentors.
Who was your PhD advisor?
For my dissertation,
yes.
Patty White, who's no longer at Ball State.
What did her department specifically study? I know you were pursuing your PhD. What was that about? I
was doing, again, a PhD in English. In Ball State's English department, the PhD is generally, if you're in literature, it's going to be a generalist position. So it was British, American, and world literature. So it wasn't really a program that had a specialization in one of those geographical areas. But that's actually why I enjoyed it. I liked the diversity of it. And I started to focus more on the cultural studies side of things. So when I eventually decided what my dissertation topic would be, that's how Patty White came into the picture. She, at the time, besides being a brilliant poet, and she still is today, she was also the literary theory specialist. And I knew that for the kind of research I was going to be doing for my project, I needed someone who could direct me toward the proper literary theories.
Yes.
Don't ask me what those are.
During your time here, you received your master's in 1982. Did you happen to have any involvement beyond, later you went to ESL, the Center for Islamabad, Pakistan. How did you become involved with that?
Oh, that's a great story. This is my favorite story to tell students. So I was, at the time, from 1984 to 1987, I was teaching at Marian College, which today is Indiana Wesleyan. So again, I was one of those young people. I had a very specific timeline. That's why I rushed through my master's degree. I knew what I wanted to do and when. And I had a lot I wanted to pack into my 20s. So when I took the position at Marian College, I from the start said I'm going to be there for 3 years and then I'm going to go and get my PhD. And that was the plan, but it was April of 1987. It was a Thursday, and I had to make a decision that day, either to sign my contract to come back for the following year or to say I'm leaving. And I didn't really feel at the time I was quite mentally ready to go back to school, work on the PhD. And I didn't necessarily want to stay there for another year. I mean, I absolutely loved my job. It was a great position for me. There was nothing to complain about there. But I just felt like I wanted to continue on my agenda. But that Thursday when I was supposed to make my decision whether or not to sign my contract, I thought, oh, what the heck, I'll stay for another year. So I got in my car. It was a 12-mile ride from my house to the college, 20-minute drive, and somewhere on that Thursday morning, I left the house about 9 a.m. Sometime during that drive, I decided, I'm not going to sign my contract. I'm going to quit my job and move to Asia. So I went to college. I taught my class that morning, just had one class, and then I typed up my resignation letter, took it, and this is really a typewriter, so I actually typed it on a typewriter, took it over to the academic dean's office, submitted my resignation, and then I went over to the library because, of course, this was the day before the internet. So there was no way of looking for organizations that might help me move to Asia. So I went to the library and started looking up relief organizations that specifically served Asian countries. And I was also somewhat interested in African countries too. I had spent a summer in Kenya, so that was still a place I was very interested. So I found catalogs and guides, etc., and I just started jotting down phone numbers, went home, got home about 3 o'clock, started making phone calls. And I just kept asking everyone, do you have any need for English teachers or writers? And it was probably about my 6th call that someone said, well, in fact, we do. And they said, the person I talked to said, we are looking for ESL teachers to work with Afghan refugees in Islamabad, Pakistan. And I said, that's it. that's exactly what I'm looking for. So I, on the phone, committed myself to this job. So between 9 a.m. and about 4:30 p.m. that day, my entire life changed. So that's how I ended up in Islamabad. I had gone over, planning to stay there for 2 years, couldn't get my visa renewed. The school that I was at had a certain quota of work visas. They had already used all those up. So I went over on a 6-month tourist visa and then had to keep getting it renewed every 3 months. I had to go to India for about a month to get it renewed there at one point. So finally it was just almost 15 months where I finally just realized the handwriting was on the wall. I was not going to get this renewed again. So sadly, I didn't get to stay as long as I wanted to, but I had amazing life-changing experiences there.
Yes. Looking forward a little bit, how did that affect your activism through Awaken?
Oh, that's how I became involved with Awaken. So, of course, Awaken is a local not-for-profit. The acronym stands for Afghan Women's Education and Necessities. So it's an organization that addresses not only educational but also healthcare and vocational training needs for women and children in a very specific region of Afghanistan. So when I came back to Muncie that second time, it was, I want to say, somewhere around 2003, I believe, I heard Bibi Barami speaking. She's the founder and president of Awaken. Awaken had started in 2002, and I heard her speak here at Ball State. And I went up to her afterwards. I actually already knew Bibi at that point, but we hadn't been in contact for a few years. I met her in '89, shortly after I returned from Pakistan. Someone said, there's an Afghan doctor who practices here locally. And I know how Afghans are, so I knew it would not seem at all forward to call him up and introduce myself. And this is Dr. Saber Barami, and he said, oh, you must come to our home. So I went to his home, and this was at a point where Bibi had only been in the country for about 2 years. Her English was not very good at that point. They lived in an apartment on the west side of town along with Saber's mother. And Bibi had already, though at this point, certainly perfected her Afghan bread making skills. So I met Bibi at that point, had a lovely meal and a lovely evening together, and then we just had absolutely no contact until that day in 2003 when I heard her speaking about this new organization that she and some other people in town here had started. I went up, said hello to her. And of course, when Bibi meets someone, when she knows she's got a live one, she will reel them in. And so she asked me then the following year if I would join the board. So I did, and I was on the board for 4 years at that point. I went off the board for a couple of years just because I had too many other organizational demands, and then went back on the board in 2012. So I am still on the board today. I'm vice president with Awaken. But yeah, so Afghans continue and always will be part of my life. There's no question of that.
Yes. And looking forward as well, how is the Honors College, especially some Honors College students, involved in Awaken?
We have in Awaken a couple of big events each year, mostly fundraising events that require lots of volunteers. And so over the last, I don't know how many years now, probably the last 7 years certainly, anytime I need students to help stuff envelopes, put labels and stamps on envelopes, anytime I need help for the fundraising dinner where we need lots of students to bus tables, I always immediately turn to honor students, and they have honestly been thrilled by the experience. When you meet Bibi Barami, you are meeting a force of nature. She truly is. So they get a chance to meet this amazing person whose life is dedicated to helping others, and I think they enjoy that experience of learning about her own life experiences. She was a refugee in Pakistan. Bibi and I often joke that I may have very well been at one point in the same camp that she was in. So we may have crossed paths at some previous point and not even have known it. But yes, for Honors College students, I think it's so incredibly important to help them see that there are many different nationalities represented right here in Muncie, and I don't think they always see that. I mean, We've got Bosnian families here. We have Vietnamese families, Korean families, and I don't know, they always have a very high awareness of how easy it is to get in touch with these people who would love to have more friends, more Muncie friends.
How does the Honors College help facilitate that understanding, those discussions?
Well, certainly Honors 189 is, I think, the primary place in the classroom where that discussion starts. Back when I was still teaching, I loved Honors 189 more than any other course, and one of my goals was to kind of shake students up a little bit, because most of our students here at Ball State, most of the students in the Honors College are Midwesterners, and while our honors students are very sophisticated thinkers, I think there still are some other cross-cultural international realities that as freshmen they may have never considered. So when I was teaching, I would bring up very taboo subjects, all the way from cannibalism to incest. There was one novel that we looked at that had that topic. That did not go over well with Honors College freshmen, let me tell you. But just those kinds of topics, I think, are important to help them understand that the way they've always thought about their world is not the way that most of the rest of the world thinks about things.
Yes. And circling back to your bachelor's, as well as your career at Ball State, how would you say that you were involved in the Honors College during this time?
Before I started teaching here?
Yes.
I wasn't involved in the Honors College at all. I probably didn't even know there was an Honors College.
Yes. How did it affect, were you aware of it pursuing your graduate school here?
No, I take that back. I was not aware of it at all during my master's degree, but when I was working on my doctorate, oh gosh, I'm thinking here again through my chronology. It was probably about 1991 that I started talking to colleagues who were teaching in the Honors College. So that's how it first came onto my radar.
Yes. And you went on to fulfill the role of assistant professor of English in 1984. How did that impact your involvement as director of publications at Marian College?
Wait, can you repeat that question, please?
Yes. In 1984, you served as director of publications at Marian College.
Oh, yes, okay.
Yes. How did that impact your career development, especially your time at Ball State, beyond your experiences gained through that position?
Well, my primary role as director of publications was to create the alumni magazine there. It was a quarterly magazine. I had students working as my primary staff. So I started learning how to get students to do very practical kinds of tasks that translated immediately out of the classroom and into real, I hate to use the term real world activities. And I think that's certainly always been part of my philosophy of teaching, to get it out of the classroom.
Yes. And as a doctoral teaching assistant here at Ball State from 1989 to 1991, how did that affect your career development as well?
Again, the teaching, the instruction that I had in my doctoral program was first rate. One thing I always liked about Ball State is that I feel our faculty here gave us, other graduate students, lots of leeway to pursue our own interests. So I was able to go off onto some tangents that I cared about very deeply. And you asked how it affected then my teaching eventually. It gave me such a strong grounding in the literary knowledge that I carried directly into the classroom for many years. Honestly, through all of the years that I was teaching, especially when I was teaching English classes, but also when I was teaching Honors 189 and certainly in the humanities sequence in the Honors College, I was always referring back to my very large 3-4-inch notebook that I kept for my doctoral exams when I was a student, and those notes, of course, were taken directly from everything I had done in the classroom. So I feel I received an outstanding education in a broad range of literary and cultural subjects that translated directly into, as I say, the honors courses that I taught.
Yes. Moving forward with that line of reasoning to the Honors College, how did you first begin being involved in the Honors College here at Ball State?
In the English department, one of my colleagues as a contract faculty member there was Carolyn Goffman. Carolyn was married to Dan Goffman, who was a professor here in the history department. So Carolyn and Dan both had been teaching in the Honors College for some time. It was actually Dan Goffman who created Honors 189 as a course. He designed it as a course that would use novels as a medium to explore other cultures. And so Dan and Carolyn had already at that point spent quite a bit of time, several years in Turkey. Dan was an Ottoman Empire scholar. So in '93, Dan and Carolyn were getting ready to go back to Turkey for, I believe it was 6 months. And Carolyn happened to mention this to me, and she said, well, is there any chance you'd be interested in teaching Honors 189 for the Honors College? And as soon as I found out what the curriculum was, of course, this is the Honors Symposium in Global Studies. It focuses on non-Western culture. When I heard that, I knew that my background, I had pretty extensive international experience at that point, and when I heard that the novel was that means to explore other cultures, I thought this is the perfect course for me. So at Carolyn's suggestion, and she recommended me to Joanne Edmonds, who at the time was the assistant dean of the Honors College, met with her, and she thought, yes, this sounded like a good fit. So it was spring semester of 1994 that I taught my first honors course. It was Honors 189 at that point. And then that following fall, I took on my first humanities sequence.
Yes. You received the Teaching Excellence in Teaching and Leadership Award and the Vanderhill Award for Distinguished Teaching and Honors Education in 1998. How is that a reflection of your work in honors education? How did it affect your development of teaching?
Well, you probably need to ask the students that, to be quite honest. If nothing else, I am an enthusiastic instructor. I don't think I've ever had a job, honestly, that I didn't love. So teaching, I loved what I was teaching. I remember coming out of Honors 189 classes every day for months and saying, I could do this all day for the rest of my life, because it was just so much fun working with these students. So I think my enthusiasm was somewhat contagious. So I was always trying to pick novels for 189 that not only I, but the students would find interesting. And because of my international experience, I think I was able to flesh out parts of books that otherwise someone who had never been out of the country, or certainly who had not been out of Western civilization, might not have been able to really bring some ethos to. So I think probably those were the factors, my ethos and my enthusiasm.
Yes. In 2001, you took a trip to Turkey with faculty and students at Istanbul University. How did this, you know you had experience outside of the country, how did this affect your honors teaching as well?
Well, there I was in Istanbul, Constantinople. So when I heard about this trip that was being offered to not just honors faculty, but to Ball State faculty to go on this trip, I leapt at the opportunity, because I had always wanted to go to Turkey. That's the place where, of course, East and West meet. That's so much of what we talk about in the humanities sequence, so I knew I needed to experience it firsthand. And it was also, that trip was also the place where I really got to know Jim Rubel, who became our honors dean. It was supposed to be Beverly Pitts who was going to be leading the trip, and I can't remember her title at that point. She may have been provost at that point. But Dr. Pitts suddenly found she was not able to lead that trip after all, so they brought in the classic scholar, Jim Rubel, and his wife Connie, and that was the first time I had actually met Connie. So for me personally, that was such a great experience to get to know them in that very comfortable, exciting, but not formal setting.
Yes. I know you had mentioned Dean Rubel, who became dean in 2000. How did he impact his students?
Oh my goodness. Jim Rubel is absolutely irreplaceable. He set a high standard for students as far as intellectual efforts. He would teach what was known at the time as the integrated class. That course actually didn't get created until sometime around 2001, 2002, and it was an opportunity for some honor students, usually about, I think it was about 24 students, to integrate a couple of the core honors courses into one. And so they had that opportunity to juxtapose topics and to therefore think about topics very differently. And so I never was in the class with Jim. I was invited to be his teaching partner at one point, and I said, no, I don't. I just had too many other irons in the fire, so I turned down that opportunity. But I do know that Jim would challenge students. He wouldn't let them get away with easy answers that they had essentially memorized from all their years of being honor students in high school. So he would push students to dig deeper and deeper and deeper. But at the same time, he was so full of humanity. I know that's what students valued about him as well. His door was always open, and students took advantage of that frequently. Students would go in not only for academic counseling, but simply for personal counseling as well. And I know of students who were going through personal life crises. The dean of the Honors College was the person whom they would turn to. That's pretty amazing. And he would give so freely of his time to counsel them, to help them find a way through and forward in their difficulties, to think about the future, think very positively about where they would be going. And Jim, unlike me, was on Facebook. He used to give me grief about this. Now, I know a lot of students, I know a lot of alumni, and I keep in touch with a lot of alumni. But every once in a while, there would be an alumnus or maybe even a current student. I would say to Jim, do you know who this is? And he would remind me that if I were on Facebook, I would know who this student is. But in any case, he would pull up his Facebook page, and he had thousands and thousands of friends. I swear half of them, maybe 2/3 of them, were students. And somehow he seemed to know what was going on with all of our current and past students. And that personal connection, I think, resounded very, very deeply with students. All of us still miss him, honestly.
And how did you raise the bar, set a higher standard, just as Dean Rubel had for your students?
Well, I again don't allow much sloppiness when it comes to writing. You can ask any student who's worked with me on writing. I expect precision, and I honestly, in my work as scholarships director, I don't care how many drafts we have to go through to get to that point, but I will keep pushing them further and further, because I know there's a good writer in there. And I think students oftentimes are very uncomfortable and unsure of themselves when it comes to, say, writing a personal statement about their own life experiences. They don't necessarily know how to put their lives on paper. So that takes a long, long time. So I am very patient, but I will push them, but I always try to make it fun too. Usually there's a lot of laughter coming from my end of the building.
Yes. And I know the first Whitinger scholarships were coming out in 1976, a little bit earlier. How did that impact your role as Director of National and International Scholarships?
Well, certainly a lot of the students whom I've worked with through the years are or have been honors, Whitinger scholars. But really beyond that, my involvement with Whitinger scholars had to do with the other hat that I wear, which is as the Honors Fellow. So that's where I started getting involved with the Whitinger Selection Committee. I cannot tell you what my first year was. If you take a look at my resume, you probably could tell me before I could. It probably was somewhere around 2001. And so I was asked to be part of the selection committee, and that's where I started getting to know many, many of the honors, the Whitinger scholars, and some of them were in my classes too.
Yes. Being a teacher in the English department as well, how was honors education different from the English department education?
I think the first thing that jumps out to me is the fact that it's multidisciplinary, which I love. My brain does not work in within a strict disciplinary boundary. So I like the fact that honors courses let me bring in the literature, but they also let me bring in history, and I would fancy myself an art historian. I know no art historian would ever agree with me on that, but I love art history. I read about it as much as I can. My first place when I go to a new city is absolutely to the art museum. So I like to push students to think, when I was teaching, I would push students to think about art in a different way. I would always take my humanities students during each of my humanities courses. I would take them down to the Indianapolis Museum of Art. And I always loved it, especially in Honors 203, which is about 19th and 20th and now 21st century culture. And I would have a series of activities for them to go and explore and try to make meaning of modern art. And many of these students despised modern art, did not understand it, and I think all of that's certainly legitimate. That's very understandable. But I would try to push them to think about, what does this mean? Obviously, some artistic decisions went into this work of art that you're seeing. So it wasn't just random. There were decisions that were made, and try to push them to think about what those decisions might be. I remember one of my students saying to me once, when we were at the Indianapolis Museum of Art, and we were looking at, I think it was a Mark Rothko painting, so basically slabs of color. And he said, but what does it mean? That's what he just couldn't rest. He wanted to know what it means. And so I turned it around to him, and I said, well, tell me, what does a daffodil mean? And I started asking him similar questions about works of music. I asked him if he'd ever been to the symphony, where there are no words, it's just the music. And I would ask him, what does this mean? So I don't know if it ever really had any impact on him, but he was one especially whom I had many conversations where I had to keep pushing his attention away from the art, which he found so troubling, to other parallel kinds of arts, not just visual arts, but literary, musical, etc., and think about, what does it mean? And I love that fact. That's one of the things that honors college classes take students to in their thinking, in the conversations that happen. Certainly that would happen in the English classes that I taught as well, but it was not, I think, a central focus in the same way that it is in an honors classroom.
Yes. You mentioned this multidisciplinary aspect as well. You were involved in a Virginia B. Ball Fellowship, Our Land, Our Literature. Would you please elaborate on this?
Sure. So I think my Virginia Ball Center experience was an opportunity to pull together many of my interests. Again, obviously I've been involved with nature. I've been a birder for most of my life, always very heavily focused on environmental issues. So when I was thinking about the Virginia Ball Center and what I might do there, my mind immediately went to environmental literature, and then I further narrowed that to Indiana's environmental literature. And I knew some of the authors. I knew who Jean Stratton Porter was. She, for probably not for younger generations, but for older generations, she's a very well-known name. So she was an author born in the late 1800s, did most of her writing about a place called the Limberlost, which is today it's a partially restored swampland that's about an hour to the northeast of us here. When she was alive, it was a 13,000 acre swampland with about 12,000 additional acres of wetlands around it. And that's what she essentially made her laboratory. She was not only a writer, but she was also a self-taught photographer as well. And so I knew her literature, and she wrote both fiction and nonfiction about birds, about moths, about butterflies, about just all the wildlife of that Limberlost swamp. So I knew her work, and I thought there's something here to build upon. And I did an initial exploration through a little grant that I got through the Ceres office here on campus. And I thought, yes, there's enough to build on. So I recruited 15 different students. All but one of them were Honors College students. I had students from English, natural resources, art, education, lots of different areas. And so over the course of the 15 weeks that we spent there, the students explored a long list of authors, and I think the original website had about 70 or so authors on it. But we took trips around the state as well. We did camping trips in southern Indiana. We went up to the northwestern part of Indiana, but I was trying to get them to not only appreciate the authors, but to appreciate Indiana's natural heritage as well. So we met with Scott Russell Sanders, who is a very well-known Indiana author. He took us around to his favorite places in the Bloomington and Bedford areas in southern Indiana. So it was a remarkable experience. It truly was the highlight of my teaching career. It was an unbelievable experience.
How was it made possible by the Honors College?
I'm sorry, say that again?
Yes. How was it made possible by the Honors College? How did honors education impact that experience?
Well, first of all, they let me go over there for an entire semester, so that was very good of them. Well, because again, all but one of my students were Honors College students. I think I knew all but 2 or 3 of the students who actually ended up signing up for the class. So the Honors College helped me get to know these amazing students, what their talents were ahead of time. I honestly did not have a hard time recruiting at all. Even before spring semester ended, before we started our seminar in the fall, I had all 15 students lined up. We were already meeting, getting ourselves kind of on track for what would happen during the fall semester. So I think it's not necessarily anything that happened directly from my teaching beyond getting to know the students.
Yes. You received the COTE Exemplar Award for your work with the Partnership in Community and your environmental activism here in Muncie. How would you say that impacted your honors teaching?
Again, I don't know if it necessarily affected my teaching at all. It was just a very gratifying experience to know that what my students had done was important and it was valued by an outside entity. I know it's still Ball State, but certainly I don't think the students were thinking that other environmental groups were necessarily going to take note of what they did.
Yes. Given the impact of this wonderful experience, what would you say was your most influential event or experience in the Honors College at Ball State?
Not talking about the
Yes.
BBC?
Yes.
Oh my gosh, you're asking for a single event?
It can be multiple.
Boy, oh boy, that is really tough. I think my early days of teaching Honors 189, as I said before, I came out of that classroom every day and said, I could do this every day for the rest of my life. I'm not sure I could, but I felt that way at the time. So what happens in the classroom? Quite honestly, that's the highlight right there. I've had so many astoundingly talented groups of students. My very first humanities sequence had some remarkable students. Three of them were Whitinger scholars. Others of them certainly could have been Whitinger scholars. But the level of creativity, the level of intellectual challenge that happened there. The nature of the courses that I've taught often brought up personal values and faith backgrounds, ethical beliefs, etc. And so I've never been one to shy away from having students voice their true opinions, their own sets of values that they bring to bear on the things they're learning, the things they're reading, and being able to essentially facilitate civil discussion about very difficult topics for some students. Evolution can be a very difficult topic for some students. We have a lot of conservative students. I don't think the Honors College students are as conservative as they used to be, but I think in the 90s they certainly were. And I would have students who would get very upset about the topic of evolution or communism, socialism, other topics like that. But always there were very reasonable fellow students in that class who could carry on a conversation and not get defensive.
On that topic, a good deal of the students at Ball State did come from the Indiana and Midwestern area. How did that impact honors education here at Ball State?
Well, what I used to say in the 90s was that about 1/3 of my students were vestigial hippies, about 1/3 were very conservative evangelical students, and the other third were kind of non-committal. They were somewhere in between all of those extremes. So I think in teaching honors classes then I did have to be conscious of those personal values that students were bringing. I never had the intention of trying to step on anyone's toes. So I don't know if I would say that was the same case with English students. I think my English students honestly were a little bit more liberal. So I did notice a little bit of a change between the two groups of students. But since then, I think honor students have really become significantly more liberal.
If it did, how did honors education challenge those students that held those beliefs? I know you had mentioned your own class work. Were there any other experiences or teaching strategies that maybe implemented that challenge?
Oh gosh, that happens every day in honors classrooms. If you think about some of the faculty who are teaching there right now, we have master teachers. We have people like Tim Berg and Jason Powell and Beth Dalton. You've got now Jackson Bartlett and Obed Frausto Gatica. We had Lori Lindbergh with us for quite a few years as well. So all of those I consider master teachers, and they are without question the people that know how to ask the right questions and help push students gently, but push students out of their comfort zones so they can, again, start thinking about ways that other people view reality, ways that other people view religion, gender issues, whatever it might be. It's an endless list.
Yes. And how did your background, coming from a more conservative home life, how did that impact your being able to connect with students?
Oh, it had a tremendous impact. I've walked, I'm in many different, I'd say, cultural groups. So I think the fact that I came out of such a highly evangelical background made it very easy for me to understand those students. I absolutely understand why students will feel uncomfortable in certain situations, may feel threatened, confused, whatever it might be. So yes, my background helped me tremendously in relating to a broad swath of students.
Yes. And you were an Honors College Fellow. It started in January 2003, and then you became an honors or scholarship advisor from Dean Rubel. How did that affect your development in honors?
Well, it took me out of the classroom eventually. So from 2003 to 2007, I was still teaching 2 honors classes every semester. For the other 2 parts of my load, I was supposedly doing scholarships for only a quarter of my load, which was absolutely absurd. Some weeks I remember, even back then, I would spend 70 hours a week on scholarships. That was on top of teaching 2 classes and then trying to do the other duties that were associated with being the honors fellow. So it had a tremendous impact because it by 2007 had taken me completely out of the classroom. So I had this gradual move out of the classroom. At one point I wasn't sure how I would really respond to that, but it's been just fine. I still have the same, in fact, even better connection with students. I get to know students one-on-one. I don't get to know as many students, but because I used to have, long ago, I would have maybe 100 students every semester. That's a lot of students, but I wouldn't get to know all of them very well anyway. So now I'm getting to know fewer students, but I certainly know them much, much more personally, and it's just great fun, absolutely great fun.
What would you say was your most impactful experience with a student?
You're asking me such hard questions. I don't know if I can narrow it down to one. There are so many experiences with students. One of the things that happens in the dynamic of scholarship applications is students do a lot of soul searching. And I'm not surprised. I'm actually really honored that students will trust me with such personal parts of their lives. They'll talk about terrible childhood experiences, and as they're considering whether or not they want to write about such things in a scholarship application. Sometimes it's not a terrible experience, sometimes it's a really good experience, or it's just simply the fact that this is this student's life. I've had students start crying almost uncontrollably as they're talking about the things that they care about. That might be music, or it might be extracurricular activities. It's not anything at all that you would think would stir up very deep emotions, but it does, because they're talking about their lives, and they're putting their lives, their passions, on a piece of paper for a group of strangers in a city far away to eventually read about. And that is a very powerful experience, and I think sometimes it drains students in ways they never ever would have expected. So getting to know about students' personal lives in that way is always so, again, I don't know what word to use for it, but it always really honors me that they do trust me this way.
Yes. And you became the Director of National and International Scholarships as your position. How did this allow you to impact students more personally? I know you had mentioned that a little bit earlier. How was that impact felt?
Okay. My approach to scholarships is that it's not about the prestige, although that's nice, but students might appreciate it, but it's really not about the prestige, and I honestly ultimately don't think it's really about the money either. It's about the opportunities and the experiences that national scholarships can allow a student to have. So that's what I'm always emphasizing. Alongside that, though, I also emphasize the process of applying for a scholarship, because, again, as I said, students are exploring very personal experiences and passions when they're applying for scholarships, and they grow a lot. So my hope always is that from the time that we started looking at a scholarship to the time that they hit that submit button, that they've grown in some ways. And students tell me again and again that they do. I get lovely, lovely thank you cards from students. I don't think students know this, but in my filing cabinet, I have a very large file of thank you notes from students whom I've worked with on scholarships. And I don't think they ever know how much I value those. But boy, if I ever need a pick-me-up in my life, I would go to that file. And I'm hoping, when I die someday, that's what I want to be read at my funeral, all of those thank you notes from those students. So even if they don't get scholarships, it's amazing how many of them say, I'm glad I did it. I would not have grown in these ways if I hadn't applied.
How does honors prepare students to be successful scholarship applicants?
Helping them to become good writers, good thinkers, to again think critically, I hate using this cliche, but it is about thinking outside the box, thinking outside those normal boundaries that would be safe and probably bring them great success academically in other contexts. But again, the Honors College usually doesn't allow them to do that. We keep nudging and nudging them to push their thinking further. So that's what scholarship foundations want to see. They don't want a 4.0 student who's done nothing but be a good student. They want those students who are challenging themselves intellectually, who are looking for ways to grow and again stretch themselves. They're looking for leaders. They're looking for students who want to have an impact on the larger community as well. So I think the Honors College does a pretty good job of encouraging students to take on leadership roles here on campus, perhaps elsewhere. And I think we're doing an increasingly better job at encouraging students to get involved with the Muncie community.
Yes. You mentioned the Muncie community. How has the Honors College become invested, or is it invested, in the Muncie community?
There is a new faction, I would almost say, within Student Honors Council. So Student Honors Council has been sending groups of students to different not-for-profits for a little while. It was probably 3 years ago, I think, that Student Honors Council first started getting involved with the Ross Community Center. And I know the director there very well. Her name is Jackie Haneman. I met her in Venezuela, believe it or not. And then she eventually ended up in Muncie, Indiana. And so when she became the director there, I encouraged the Student Honors Council president to think about having students volunteer over there. And they sent their first group of students. It went very well. Students felt really good about the kinds of activities they were doing, primarily with kids there. One of our honor students, though, I know was doing also some renewable energy workshops for adults as well, to help them think about really simple, practical ways they could reduce their electric bills or their water bills. And so now, I don't know, I honestly don't know all the details, but now there's a separate group that's breaking off from Student Honors Council that's going to be even more engaged with community service. Dr. Tim Berg has been helping coordinate some of those activities. Right now we have a group of 16 Honors College students over at the Virginia Ball Center, being co-led by one of our professors, but actually initiated by an Honors College student, a junior, who had the idea of starting a not-for-profit here in Muncie. And so this fall, when that group then launches, it's I think going to be a primary way for honor students to be deeply involved with the Muncie community.
And who is the student that's coordinating this?
It's Lydia Story. She is a junior. She is a political science major, and she also has an integrated major, or might be a medallion scholar major, but she has a major that she created in health policy as well. So she had been a volunteer at an organization down in Louisville, Kentucky last summer called the Family Scholars House, and primarily it's focused on helping single parents from low-income backgrounds find ways to get education for themselves, which then becomes kind of that launching pad for pulling themselves out of poverty and creating better lives for themselves and certainly for their children. So when Lydia saw this, she thought, we need this here in Muncie. So she approached Dr. Jason Powell about having this become a Virginia Ball Center activity. And so now the organization here is called the Beneficence Family Scholars organization, and I'm just astounded that a junior is doing this, and she has 15 other Honors College students who are pouring their blood, sweat, and tears into making this happen.
Yes. You mentioned immersive learning with this experience. How does that impact honors education here at Ball State?
Oh, it's huge, absolutely huge. Again, honor students, I think, tend to be those kinds of students who like to be involved in many different kinds of things. That multidisciplinary, interdisciplinary learning is something that we throw them into from the very start, and I think they learn to seek that out because they understand that learning does not happen within one set of disciplinary parameters, that they are going to learn best when they're bringing other factors into play. So yes, Honors College students have been some of the very best Virginia Ball Center participants over the years.
Can you name other impactful projects that you know of?
Oh gosh, yes. So there was Muslims in Muncie. It was a project that was led last year by Dr. Elizabeth Agnew, and it was aimed at helping bridge that gap between Muslims and non-Muslims, and specifically helping Ball State students, whether or not they're Muslim themselves, to get involved and understand the concerns, the issues of Muslims who live in a Midwestern town that doesn't immediately speak diversity when you think about the Islamic population. So students found that absolutely to be life-changing. I don't know how many of the participants there were Honors College students, but I certainly know that quite a few were.
Yes. And you mentioned sustainable systems and implementing. Yeah. How has the Honors College been involved in, or have they been involved in sustainable systems and eco-friendly work?
Well, we're working on it. So you know, of course, that we are in a very old house, built in the 1930s. My office has the original single pane windows. It is very cold in my office on a winter morning, I will say that. So we have started conversations about what needs to happen as the building eventually gets modified. So there are some physical concerns. Old houses are leaky, you know, both in water and in air. So there are concerns there. We're having the conversations. I think plans will start to firm up in the next year or so. It's not a fast process by any means. In terms of sustainable practices and issues, do you know, I don't know if this is a campus-wide policy, but every faculty member in the Honors College is expected to put our sustainable policy on each syllabus. And that extends to how we use paper, you know, trying to use fewer photocopies, trying to use more digital forms of texts or handouts or whatever it might be. But also thinking about the issues that have to do with sustainability. I know Jason Powell has taught a course on consumerism, and he has students in that course read, oh gosh, I just forgot the title, and I know this title so well, but he has students think about the bigger picture of how we live our lives, how we individually consume, whether it's non-renewable resources or energy or whatever it might be. Annie Leonard, that's who I was trying to think of. So Annie Leonard, yeah, wonderful author that I know Jason uses in his classroom. So it's happening at both the curricular level. It needs to be happening more on the physical level. But just about a week ago, we did, as a committee, as a faculty, as a committee, met with Dr. Ted Wollner, who used to teach for us before he retired. He's an architecture historian, but he would usually teach the humanities sequence for us, usually one course a semester. And in his retirement, he's focusing on climate change. And so we had a great conversation with him about what we in the Honors College can be doing to make students more aware of what this will mean in their lives. I'm sure students know this. I don't think we have to tell them. But so often when you're looking at big issues like this, you sometimes just want to throw your hands in the air and say, what can I do? Or you want to bury your head in the sand. And I think we as a group of faculty and staff want to do more than that. We want to have some meaningful, important ways to get students thinking about climate change in their own lives.
Yes, you've stayed involved with a lot of organizations off campus. I know you're a sub-licenser, you were, and volunteer in wildlife rehabilitation with Wildlife Rescos Incorporated. How have you integrated that into your teaching as well as into your work as scholarship director?
Well, so yes, for 17 years I was a licensee, sub-permittee for the Wildlife Rescue House. It was the nation's longest running federally licensed wildlife rehabilitation center, 50 years. It's Diana Schaefer, the woman who ran that organization, that facility. Had really just a couple of us at any given time who were sub-permittees. So I did most of her small mammals for her, and of course little bunnies and little squirrels need to be fed frequently. So students often knew that if they came in on a March day or April day, they would probably find an animal carrier next to my desk with little animals in it. So I was very popular in that regard. So I would sometimes take these animals to class. I don't think I'm supposed to say that because that's probably illegal. But anyway, so it had that very practical impact because students don't necessarily know what a newborn squirrel looks like. So they enjoyed seeing all of that. But I don't know if it had any other real impact on my teaching, to be quite honest, but it was something I was very committed to. I was a very, very active volunteer for 17 years.
And I know that in 2005, after some frequent flooding, you led the effort to fill sandbags and coordinate with Honors College students to help here in Muncie. How did that affect the Honors College students, and how did their efforts affect you?
That was a very small event. It was just simply a one-day event. So I heard about the flooding that was happening in the northern part of the county, and I informally put out the word that we could use some honor students. If they were interested, I would put together the coordination with the Red Cross. So we went up to a fire station in Rorton, and we filled sandbags, and then we took them out to home. So I think, again, for students, though, it was another way for them to get involved with the people who live here and feel they had done something very, very practical. I mean, it was very obvious. There was an immediate impact. The water was pouring into this poor woman's basement, and half an hour later, it was not.
Yes. How would you discuss Honors College students' activism and their involvement in the community?
How would I discuss it?
Yes. How have you seen it as a teacher and scholarship director?
I think initially, especially as freshmen, whether they're honors freshmen or they're not freshmen, they're generally not from this immediate area. They don't know what opportunities there are to get involved with the community. A lot of times, honor students especially are so focused on their grades. They don't want to get a B- or even an A-. So they're either out of their own volition, or they're told by parents, stay focused on grades. Don't get over involved with things. So I have to nudge students frequently during their first and second semesters to get off campus and get to know the good people of Muncie. So I don't think that at that stage they're much different from other college students, at least not here at Ball State. Once they get a little bit more settled, then I think you have, not all students, but you do have more and more students who start to see what their friends are doing. And their friends are involved with volunteerism down at the Boys and Girls Club, or at the Bewley Center, or out at the Second Harvest Food Bank, or whatever it might be. And I think sometimes it's good peer pressure that gets them involved, because they have a friend who says, you should come with us and help out. And anybody knows this. When you're involved in community service, you feel better about yourself as well. And that good feeling is something that happens every time they go out. So the more they do it, the better they feel. And the more they get to know, again, local citizens, and they feel that connection with the people, with the cause that they're contributing to. And I think it just kind of propagates itself at that point.
Many of the scholarships that you work with students to help attain do focus on a volunteer aspect. Looking back to your work with scholarships and coordinating with students, what would you say were your proudest moments of students that had achieved scholarships or wonderful fellowships?
Oh, again, that's a long list. Probably one of our top poster children for Honors College students who've won scholarships is Sarah Sorrell. If I'm remembering correctly, she was a 2007 graduate of the Honors College. She graduated in 3 years. She was a pre-med major and biology major. And near the end of her senior year, I told her about a scholarship that unfortunately no longer exists, but it's called the Jack Kent Cook Graduate Scholarship. It was worth $300,000. It was worth $50,000 a year for 6 years toward grad school, med school, law school, whatever it might be. And I had known Sarah for a very long time. I actually interviewed her for the Whitinger Scholarship when she was a high school senior. And I remember Sarah telling me as a high school senior exactly what she was planning to do in her career. So she knew from the start that she was going to be a doctor and that she was going to be working internationally. While she was here as a student, she actually created the Timmy Global Health, they've changed the name. I think it's now Timmy Global Health. At the time it was called the Timmy Foundation. She started the very first campus chapter of the Timmy Foundation, and now, as I say, Timmy Global Health. And so she was helping coordinate medical service trips to Ecuador, to South Africa, other places I can't remember. So if I think I was very focused and single-minded in my pursuits in my 20s, I was nothing like Sarah. She knew exactly what she wanted to do. So she graduated in 3 years, and she got the Jack Kent Cooke Scholarship. She used 3 of the years of support there to go to IU and get her MD degree. And then she used the other 3 years of support to go to Cambridge University, where she got a PhD in, I think it was phrenology, if I'm not mistaken, or nephrology. I always get those two mixed up. It's either nephrology or phrenology. I think one of those is the study of bumps on the head, and the other is the study of kidneys. Hers was the study of kidneys. Anyway, so she had nearly all of her postgraduate education paid for. And she was using that opportunity to prepare herself for now what is her career as a doctor who focuses, and doctor and researcher, I should say, who focuses on women's health care needs in the Middle East. And I don't remember exactly where she is now, but that's what she's doing. So from the age of 17, she knew this is the direction she was going. So yes, Sarah is absolutely remarkable. Her life is all about service. You want to meet somebody selfless. It's Sarah Sorrell. And I could go on and on with many, many other names, but it's all about those students who say, I want to change the face of my profession in some way. One of our fairly recent scholarship winners was Will J. He won the Goldwater Scholarship, which is a scholarship that's just for STEM majors. So he was a physics major here at Ball State, and he won this as a junior. And then he was a finalist for the Rhodes Scholarship. And he did not win that, but he actually did end up doing his master's degree work at Cambridge University in what was typically known as the world's most difficult theoretical mathematics program. It was the world's most difficult, so of course he had to do it. And then he finished up his PhD in theoretical physics at the University of Colorado Boulder just last year. So now he's up in a western Chicago suburb working at Fermilab. So he's quite remarkable, and in his case, it's all about advancing his profession, advancing physics to new heights that physics has not reached yet. And on the list goes. Right now, if I can throw in one more, right now we have Hannah Fluhler, who is a graduating senior in the Honors College. We recently found out, just last Wednesday, we found out that she has received a Fulbright to go to Australia for the coming year, where she'll be helping conduct research on a disease called Fanconi anemia. It's a very rare disease that affects newborns and is usually fatal after just a few years. So Hannah found one of the 3 top Fanconi anemia researchers in the entire world, and she applied to be in his lab, and she was accepted, and she now has the Fulbright to make that experience possible. So these are the kind of students I get to work with every day. I mean, who else on Ball State's campus can say this? This is what I get to do for my job. Who would not love this?
Amazing stories.
Yeah.
How would you say that their Honors College work at Ball State impacted them in those experiences following graduation?
Oh, these are all students who will tell you if it were not for the Honors College, they would not be where they are today. Tremendous moral support with Hannah Fluhler, for example. While she was, I think it was the end of her sophomore year, she applied for a research fellowship, and she then received that during her junior, oh, I got that backwards. She applied during her junior year and has been doing this during her senior year, but she's been doing research on the impact of movement on opioid withdrawal in newborns. So she designed this project herself and is still in the process of carrying it out at Ball Memorial Hospital here in town. So without that grant, she probably would not have had as impressive of a Fulbright application as she did. So everything kind of snowballs, but these Honors College students have always been the kind who seek out experiences, aren't waiting for something to fall into their lap, and it's partly their own personality, but I do think, yes, the Honors College has help them see possibilities. We have the amazing undergraduate research fellows program in the Honors College. That's where a lot of students get their start doing independent research, or at least being mentored in research, and that can make all the difference when they're applying to grad school or applying for scholarships too.
Yes. And looking at the Honors College here at Ball State compared to Honors College overall in the country, how would you say that the Honors College here at Ball State compares to other honors colleges that you've experienced or engaged with?
I'm not going to be the best person to answer that question. That's really a question for Dr. Emmert. But I do know certainly Ball State's Honors College has been known as one of the best. A few years ago, when Jim Rubel was president of the National Council of Collegiate Honors Council, which is the nationwide organization for honors colleges and programs, we certainly had a very strong reputation for, as I say, being one of the best. I'm not going to name names, but there's another university, not too terribly far from Muncie, that created its own honors college just a few years ago. And almost to the course, they imitated what we were doing. And that really is, that imitation is the best form of flattery. So it told us that, yes, we're doing something right if another much bigger institution wants to imitate what we're doing.
Yes. You bring up the National Collegiate Honors Council.
Mm-hmm.
How has Ball State engaged with conferences? I know this year they're hosting the Mideast Honors Association Conference.
Right. So at the national level, again for the NCHC conference, every year Ball State sends a surprisingly large group of not only faculty, but also a lot of students as well. I don't remember the exact numbers, but I think it was close to 20 people, if not 20, who traveled to the last conference. We have had students here, at least one student who served on the National NCHC Advisory Council. So that was an honor, and certainly other honor students are encouraged to apply for this kind of thing. With the regional organization, Mid-East Honors Association, or MIHA, as students usually call it, members call it, I don't know for sure that this is the first time that we've hosted it, but it's certainly the first time that I know that it's happened. So it rotates around to different universities that are that have honors colleges or honors programs in the Midwest. So it's a lot of work, but our Student Honors Council and Coralie Young, our administrative coordinator, they really are the people who are leading the charge, and then our dean as well. All of those people are leading the charge in making sure that we put on a good event for our colleagues at other institutions.
Yes. And looking at Honors College overall here at Ball State, you had mentioned earlier about the Honors House,
Mm-hmm.
the Virginia
Yep.
and Edmund B. Honors House.
Mm-hmm.
How would you say that having a house like that instead of a building much larger impacts the Honors College experience that students receive here?
It has made a tremendous difference. I don't know that everybody always sees that, at least not students, because they don't know where we came from. So for many years, we were in the basement of Carmichael Hall. And actually, years and years ago, we were in this building. We were in Burkhardt. But for quite a few years, we were in the basement of Carmichael Hall. I had an office there with no windows for many years, but it was a fun space in some ways because we were kind of tucked away and we could do whatever we wanted down there. I had my walls painted purple and green, and it was very outlandish. So that was a lovely space. We actually had more classroom space there. So we did lose that when we moved to the current Honors House, but Jim Rubel had always been on the lookout for a way for us to move to a more central location, because of course there we were tucked away at the northern end of campus. And so it meant we didn't get a lot of traffic except for those students and faculty who were coming there to teach classes. And sometimes other people didn't even know we existed down there. So when Jim heard that that Virginia Ball had in her will bequeathed the house to the university, he leapt at the opportunity to claim that for the Honors College. And so since then, of course, all of the spaces on the main and second floors have been completely remodeled. We haven't quite done that with the basement yet, but all of those spaces have been dramatically remodeled, And students now come there to hang out between classes. We'll often see them in the gathering area, reading a book, sitting there with their laptops, sometimes having conversations. When we have high school seniors and their parents coming for visits, I think it makes a stellar impression. They again, it's a home, so it feels homey. And I think parents feel very good about the kind of place they're going to send their son or daughter off to. But it allows us also to do a lot more social activity there. We have an honest-to-goodness kitchen. At the old location, we had just a teeny tiny little kitchen with a sink and a refrigerator. I don't think we had a stove there. So now we've got a couple of stoves, and we can host dinners there when we need to, and students love it. They enjoy the space.
Yes. You had also worked with a business fellow initiative, profiting nonprofits through grantsmanship.
Mm-hmm.
How did this involve Honors College students in the grant writing process?
I had a mix of half undergraduates and half graduate students. I believe all of my undergraduates were Honors College students, if not all of them, nearly all of them. And so the goal of that project was to, first of all, have students learn grant writing, grantsmanship. And so I worked closely with the sponsored program office here, now it's called SPA, but I had them work closely with some staff there. I had a panel of very experienced grant writers from the community come and share their tips. So that was the first goal, to have students learn how to do this kind of thing. And I had already picked out the not-for-profits that I wanted to benefit from this. So this was very self-serving. These were all groups that I was involved with. So I had Awaken, I had the Robert Cooper Audubon Society, I had the Limberlost, I also had, I'm trying to remember, I can't remember another one, but the fifth one was to start a new organization, which became Living Lightly. It was to start a sustainable resource fair, a sustainable living fair. So the money was to, the money that students were trying to get through grants would then either promote specific activities, or in the case of Living Lightly, to actually provide seed money for the founding of an organization. So in this case, again, students got to know our community partners. I remember the fifth one, it was Cope Environmental Center down in Centerville. So those were our 5 community organizations. So we, of course, spent time at each of those places. Students learned about the vision and the mission and the activities and the needs, both financially and otherwise. And so some of them did continue to be involved in those organizations even after that Business Fellows project ended.
You brought up Living Lightly and the Sustainable Living Fair. Would you please elaborate on that?
Sure. Well, because of that Business Fellows project, and it was, I can't remember both of the students, but I know one of the students was an Honors College student named Mona Luxon, who was very committed to sustainability, and she, in fact, was an architecture major. So she was very enthusiastic about this as well, and so as she and I and the other student, it was a graduate student, and I were talking, and we started pulling in more community leaders. We had some Robert Cooper Audubon Society leaders, we had some Sierra Club leaders involved, and we just kind of put out a general call to people we knew who cared about these kinds of things. The way, I should back up to say, the way that this actually all started was that I had visited the Midwest Renewable Energy Association fair up in Custer, Wisconsin, a couple of years before that, and I came back that so jazzed up and energized, and I kept telling people, we need this kind of thing in Muncie, Indiana, and everyone kept saying, yes, we do, and that was it. So it was through the Business Fellows project that we were able to pull together enough people who said, yes, we do need this, and I want to be part of the group that makes it happen. So initially there were 8 of us. One of them was Warren Vanderhill. He was our development coordinator, and of course he was involved with the Honors College years ago. And there were a couple of faculty here on campus, but we also had community people. So it was about half community, half Ball State. And then the student that I mentioned, Mona Luxon, she stayed on that original founding planning committee as well. So for about a year, we put together our ideas and plans, and we launched the first Living Lightly Fair in was actually in June of 2007. And then the following year, we started to partner with Minnetrista, and we moved it to September. So for a total of 11 years, we had an annual event. At first it was 2 days, and then it became 1 day, but it was an annual event. We would have easily more than 2,000 people who would come. They would hear speakers about different topics related to sustainable living, from how to reduce energy costs in your home to how to start gardening organically, to many, many other topics. And we would have music, we had children's activities, we would have art, lots of different kinds of things. So we hope we had a significant impact. Living Lightly actually just closed its doors in December of 2018 for various reasons, but those of us who were still leading it just felt like, yeah, this is the right time. So it's bittersweet. We're sad that it's not going to happen anymore, but Living Lightly will continue on. There's no question of that. We feel like the influence will continue, and also there's actually going to be an honors colloquium during spring of 2020 that will involve not only Living Lightly Fair, but we'll be looking at other sustainability fairs throughout the Midwest and similar kinds of sustainability initiatives. And don't be surprised if you occasionally hear about speakers who are coming to Mad Jack's in downtown Muncie, who will be speaking about something related to sustainability. It gets hard to say after a while. So
that's very exciting to hear. You are still involved in a lot of your environmental activism, and in 2007 was awarded the Robert H. and Esther L. Cooper Conservation Award. How did that reflect your continued involvement? I know you mentioned Living Lightly. Mm-hmm. Was there any other involvement you maintained in the community?
Yes. Well, that award, very kindly recognized the work I had done volunteering for the Wildlife Rescue House for many years, and then Robert Cooper Audubon Society. I have had many leadership roles with that organization, so just those kinds of things. And I am fairly obsessed with sustainability, so I'm always looking for ways to cut my own footprint, ecological footprint.
Yes. Ball State throughout the years has been very involved as well off campus, and our new initiative with We Fly emphasizes a little bit of that as well as taking students where they are and moving them forward. Mm-hmm. Would you say that the Honors College, and if so, how, has manifested We Fly, or how it responds to that new campaign change?
Are you connecting We Fly and sustainability, or just We Fly?
Just We Fly.
Just We Fly. Dr. John Emmert was actually on the committee that selected that centennial motto and all of the imagery that goes with it. So we embraced We Fly early on. If you ever come in the Honors House these days, you'll see a very tall banner in there, life-size banner of a recent Honors College student who has a stack of books behind her, and she has a book that's opened up, kind of looks like bird wings. So that idea of our flying, I think, has to do with intellectual heights that we would hope to take students to. So yes, certainly We Fly is part of our daily mentality over there.
Yes. You mentioned helping students fly. What has been your most influential experience with faculty members in the Honors College?
What do you mean exactly?
Were there any impactful experiences? I know you mentioned of faculty members teaching wonderful colloquiums that impacted mm-hmm. students, but any faculty members that had recommended a student for a scholarship or award or encouraged them?
That happens all the time. That's literally almost if not a weekly experience, probably a monthly experience, that I have someone in the Honors College, whether there are regular faculty or there are cooperating, contributing faculty from other departments. Almost always they're recommending students to me. I do overtly seek their suggestions once a year. I'm in the midst of that right now. But certainly the faculty who teach for us are always very keenly aware, I think, of students' abilities. They see those students who are extraordinarily sharp. I have one of our faculty members just said to me last week that one of his current juniors is already working at the level of a PhD student. And so he said to me, you need to talk to her. So get her in your office. So faculty are aware of those kinds of students. They don't necessarily know what they do outside of the classroom. They may not know about their leadership, extracurricular activities, or service activities, but they definitely know what their academic pursuits are like.
Yes. And you had mentioned in 2015, actually, recently, you had been awarded the Delaware County Personal Integrity Award.
Oh, yes.
How do you think that reflects your work in the Honors College, in the community, and Ball State generally?
This is the result of Bibi Barami nominating me. So Bibi had won that award a couple of years ago, and every year a winner is asked now to think of someone else who should be nominated. So that was Bibi's work. She has I think appreciated my assistance with Awaken. They definitely can't accuse me of not working hard for Awaken. So that was Bibi's work. She made that nomination.
Yes. I know you had mentioned several Honors College courses over our conversation. Mm-hmm. What do you think is the most impactful honors course that you've seen over your career in the Honors College or currently?
All I can speak to is what I have taught. I still have to go back to Honors 189. Honors College students often come to Ball State already having studied Western humanities in great depth. A lot of our students have already read the Odyssey, the Inferno, etc. But I don't think a lot of them have much experience with non-Western literature, non-Western culture and concepts. So to me, that's the single most important course that they will take, because it's our one chance to open them up to the rest of the world. Honestly, I wish it were more than just a single course. We are always working to make the humanities sequence not just focused on Western civilization. And I think we do a pretty good job of that. We should do a better job of that.
Yes. Looking forward, if you were to propose a course, I know you had mentioned the new colloquium coming up. Mm-hmm. What would you suggest?
For me to teach or for somebody else to teach?
Your choice.
Well, that's an interesting question. Most of my colloquia over the years had to do with environmental literature. That's where I would always go, or environmental ethics. So if I were to teach a colloquium today, one of my favorite colloquia that I taught actually was just about, I called it A Day in the Life, and it was to have students think about all of the truly countless factors that go into making a single day of life possible, from the carpet under their feet to the fact that the earth is still spinning, everything from a cosmological level down to a very practical level. So I would probably, if I were to teach, I don't know if I'm capable of teaching. I had a lot of guest speakers in that course, and I would probably revive that kind of course again. I think I learned some things the first time I taught it, and would love to see that happen again.
Yes. Over the years, the Honors College has discussed how they're a family, they're very close, a community. How do you see that? Do you see that in the Honors College?
I certainly know my students I work with, much better than I've ever known students in the English department or at other institutions that I've taught in. Yes, I think it again because classroom discussions and the kinds of discussions I have with students for scholarships, all of those do take students to their own level of personal values, and that's pretty personal stuff. So I think at that level you do get to just like the people you're learning from, the people who are in your classes. There have been many informal book clubs in the Honors College through the years, led by Jim Rubel, led by Jason Powell, and that's partly because these people like to be around each other. Our faculty like our students very much. It's not that we end the day and say, oh good, I get to go home and get away from these students. We really truly like to be around them.
Yes. What would you say is the best part of being part of the Honors College?
Oh, it's the students, no question. The kind of students that we attract, their willingness to grow, their willingness to try out new ideas, to humor us even when we ask them to do ridiculous things. And they're very polite. These are Midwesterners for the most part, so they're very polite.
Yes. Are there any challenges with working in the Honors College that you've encountered over the years?
Well, maybe the flip side of that is that because we do have so many Midwesterners, we have a surprising number of students, not just in the Honors College, but at Ball State as a whole, who've never been outside of Indiana. That always really surprises me to find those students, but they're still out there. Many of them have never been out of the Midwest. Many of them have never been on an airplane. And so sometimes that can be a little bit of a challenge because they don't bring with them broad, I don't want to make broad generalizations here, but some students don't bring with them a broad range of experiences that can actually contribute to conversations as well. But I don't really think that that's a limitation. It's just where we are. It's where these students are, and that's perfectly valid. We start from that point.
You mentioned keeping in contact with students. Does the Honors College have an alumni network?
No, but we're starting one. We don't know why this has never happened, but yes, we will be starting an alumni association. We certainly stay in touch with Whitinger scholars, and informally we stay in touch with students. So anytime I travel, the first thing I do is think, which Honors College alumni do I know in this town? So I was in New York City in December. So I made arrangements to have dinner with it was a 2014 alumna and then 2 2018 alumni. So we all had dinner together.
Discussing students that are moving on, what has been your hardest goodbye in the Honors College?
Wow. Well, Jim Rubel. Yeah.
Yes. And coming to the close of our interview, is there anything that you would like to say that I have not covered with my questions?
I don't think so.
Yes. With that, we'll bring our interview to an end. On behalf of the Ball State University Honors College Oral History Project, I want to thank you, Dr. Stedman, for participating in our project.
My pleasure, and I mean that.